Now that it's looking extremely likely that the NHL players will be participating in the next Winter Olympics in 2022, today we're going to start an early series predicting who I think will be on each of the team's rosters. We're getting started with Team Canada, and that's coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, today we're starting a series predicting Olympic rosters for the 2022 Winter Olympics. Now, I know it's a little bit early, but obviously with all the news coming lately, with the CBA likely getting close to being ratified and finalized here, the NHL players will be participating in the next two Winter Olympics, which is great news. Not having them there the last time just wasn't quite the same. The quality of hockey certainly was a lot lower, not as fun to watch. So I'm certainly looking forward to having them back in action there, and I'm hoping that you are as well. So today we're going to start off with some roster predictions for Team Canada. Now, this is extremely difficult. Some of these countries, Canada included, have so many great players you could almost put together two really strong teams, to be honest. Some of the last cuts I had to make were incredibly difficult, and I'll explain some of my decisions and some of the players that were really close, in my opinion, to making my predicted roster here. So let's get started with the goaltenders. In goal, we have Carey Price of the Montreal Canadiens, followed by Jordan Binnington of the St. Louis Blues and Carter Hart of the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, I went with these three guys as my goaltenders. Now, I know Carey Price isn't quite the dominant goaltender he used to be, but if you ask around the NHL players still seem to say if you had to pick a goalie to be in the net in a gold medal game or Game 7 game, they will pick Carey Price more than just about any other goaltender around the NHL. So he's still really solid in the net, especially with a stronger team in front of him. And I would still want him there for his calmness and his experience, especially if the other two goalies are the guys that end up on the roster. You need to have a guy there with some experience who can kind of really mentor these younger guys. Not to say that Price will definitely be the starting goaltender. That part was difficult to decide. We still have a lot of regular NHL action to view and consider before that gets to that. So I'm not quite certain exactly who I'd start. Obviously, in the early games of the tournament, you'd probably want to get at least a couple of them with some in-game action. Of course, you get Jordan Binnington to the St. Louis Blues, recently won a Stanley Cup, shows that he also has nerves of steel back there and can win the big games, and obviously he deserves an opportunity, in my opinion. And you get Carter Hart as well. The Philadelphia Flyers made the NHL at a pretty young age. Like Carey Price, is very calm, cool, and collected back there in the net, has a lot of other international experience with Team Canada at lower levels, so that will certainly come in handy for him. And he's been a pretty strong goalie for the Flyers, and he'll have that much more experience by the time we get to 2022 as well. So personally, these are my three goalie selections for me. Now, of course, some guys that were really close to making the cut included the pair of goalies in Pittsburgh with Matt Murray and Tristan Jarry. They're both Canadian-born goalies. Of course, right now, I'd probably pick Jarry over Murray, to be honest, but still, Matt Murray's got a great resume with a couple Stanley Cups on it. And another guy you have to consider as well is Coyotes goalie Darcy Kuemper, who's certainly, probably fair to say he's a bit of a late bloomer. He's 30 years old now, but what he's done in Arizona over the past 2 years has been phenomenal. He's got some incredible stats, and really, if he keeps up that play, he absolutely has to be considered for this team. Depending on how the other guys do, there's certainly, no guarantee. And of course, you get some other veterans around as well that you can't count out of the mix. A guy like Braden Holtby, for example, depending on what free agency does for Holtby, where he ends up, if he gets himself back on track, he could be considered as well. But I think for the most part, we're going to see a trend of some younger players getting more opportunities. That's why I went with guys like Binnington and Hart. So those are my goalie selections. Of course, as always with everything here, I'd like to know who you would select for these positions as well. So let me know down in the comments what you think of the goalie selections. Now let's next move to the blue line. Now, Canada, of course, has a lot of great blue liners, but not quite as many as they used to. I must say, in years past, the blue line was even stronger. But of course, you look at compared to other countries now, that was always one of the biggest strengths for Canada. Not to say that it won't be this time. They'll still have a tremendous blue line. But obviously, in the past, I found there was times where they really had an advantage over many other countries, but we've seen a lot of the other countries catch up in this regard. Now, my first D pair would be Thomas Chabot on the left side of the Ottawa Senators and Alex Pietrangelo of the St. Louis Blues, captain of the Blues, Stanley Cup champion, on the right. These two guys can both play a ton of minutes. They can both play both ends of the ice as well. Chabot is a little bit more offensively gifted. Obviously, Pietrangelo pretty solid on both ends of the ice. Of course, they both have a lot of experience. They've both worn the Team Team Canada sweater at different levels as well before. Big-time minute munchers in their teams. I mean, Chabot was one of the leading guys in the NHL for minutes, playing often 25 to 27 minutes a night. Plays in all situations for Ottawa. So obviously, that's been a valuable experience. And Pietrangelo is one of the top right-side rear guards in the NHL currently right now. Next up for my second pair, I've got Morgan Rielly of the Toronto Maple Leafs and Dougie Hamilton of the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, both were having tremendous years here this past season. Of course, Rielly's year before was even better. Dougie Hamilton was on pace for some tremendous stats before he suffered a serious injury this year, but both are certainly in their prime years right now. They both have some really strong attributes, both really strong offensively as well, and can contribute on the power play, and I would expect them both to be on this roster. Next up for my third pair, I've got Josh Morrissey, the Winnipeg Jets, and captain of the Habs, Shea Weber on the right. Now, this was a really, really tough decision getting down to it, but you need to have some guys who can play a little bit stronger in the defensive end, kill penalties, block shots, that kind of stuff. So that's why Morrissey was selected. He gets a little bit underrated, in my opinion, in Winnipeg, but clearly Morrissey is a really strong defender, can chip in offensively as well, played for Team Canada at lower levels in the juniors before, has some good international experience, and of course you get Shea Weber, the veteran, who's really tough to leave off this roster. Now, of course, you never know. I mean, Weber's battled his fair share of injuries in the last few years. Depending on which guys are healthy at the time of this tournament, could also dictate who makes this roster. And of course, we'll get into it later here as well, who my extra spare parts are, I guess we'll say, because you are allowed to carry an extra defenseman and an extra forward in this tournament, and we'll get to that here at the end once we reveal the forwards. But obviously on defense, there were some tough cuts to make, and there's certainly some tough considerations. But as far as some other guys that I would have in the mix here, of course you got guys like Cale Makar of the Avalanche. He's only got one rookie season completed, but a dynamic player, definitely would be in contention. You got Shea Theodore of Vegas, should be considered as well. Doesn't always get a ton of recognition too, but certainly he's evolved into being a really solid blue liner. Of course you got the veteran as well, Drew Doughty. Hard to leave Doughty off this list, but I just feel that Doughty has regressed a lot in his play over the past couple of years, and given that this tournament is still another ways away here in 2022, I'm just not sure that Doughty would still be playing at a high enough level to compete on that roster. But you could probably argue the same about maybe even a guy like Weber too. I mean, Weber's pretty solid, but will another year or two of play impact how he can perform at that international stage? Difficult to say, but Doughty definitely in contention, but for me, just not quite there as of right now. Even a guy like Colton Parayko, the St. Louis Blues, should be considered as well, especially if a guy like Weber couldn't go. I mean, I know they're an exact same kind of defenseman, but Parayko's a guy who can play solid in the defensive end and could make a pretty good shutdown pair with Josh Morrissey. So I'll unveil here at the end after the forward group who my extra guys are. So one of those defensemen I just named here are going to be on the roster as the 7th D. Now let's jump into the forward groups. This was incredibly difficult. There's all kinds of so many solid forwards here in Canada, but obviously they can't all participate. And I'll tell you as well, again, like I did with the other positions, who I ended up cutting at the end and who my spare parts will be here shortly. But let's go with forward line 1, which is a line that you've seen many times for Canada at the international stage, centered by Captain Sidney Crosby. Likely words to see for this team. I mean, Crosby is one of the greatest players of all time. Scored one of the biggest goals in Canadian history, the 2010 Winter Olympics. He's still playing at an incredibly high level, and the line that he's played with on an international stage with Patrice Bergeron and Brad Marchand, of course, who both play together in Boston, have been incredibly really solid and gifted line for the Canadian teams when they've played together. And Bergeron and Crosby have played together numerous times since the juniors. Of course, Marchand and Bergeron played together a lot as well in Boston on the same line. They're one of the best lines in hockey. And Marchand and Crosby actually both trained together a lot during the summertime, both Nova Scotia boys, and they obviously, along with Nathan McKinnon and a couple other guys that are coming up, like Drake Batherson, have been obviously training a lot together in Nova Scotia during the summertime, during the off seasons. So they have developed some chemistry, know each other quite well as well. So that line to me has been tremendous, and I don't see any reason to not have it be your leading line going into this tournament. Now, next up, it's hard to imagine these guys being second-line players, but only in the Olympics would you see that. Center iceman would be Connor McDavid, obviously one of the fastest players in the world, if not the fastest, one of the top offensively gifted guys. And his wingers would be Nathan McKinnon on the right and Jonathan Huberdeau on the left. Of course, McKinnon and the Avalanche, obviously a solid team. McKinnon and McDavid together would be an incredibly fast line. McKinnon's not far off from McDavid's speed, and you get Jonathan Huberdeau. They're really steady steady guy in Florida on the left side, been putting up, it was on pace for back-to-back 90-point-plus seasons this year before the pause. He can really mesh with a variety of players, can be a great complementary piece. He's really smart, knows how to positionally be strong around the net, great passer as well, so I think he'd be a good fit with just about anybody. I think he's that kind of guy that could find chemistry with a lot of players, but for me, I think McDavid and McKinnon would be a dynamic 1-2 punch, and then you throw the steady Huberdeau on the left side to kind of even things out there, and I think that would be a tremendously gifted line too for Team Canada. Next up, your third line will be centered by Winnipeg Jets center iceman Mark Scheifele, and his wingers will be Mitch Marner, the Maple Leafs, on the right, and we're going to put Steven Stamkos on his left wing on the offside here from the Tampa Bay Lightning. Now, of course, this is another line that was a little bit difficult to pick in a way. There's a lot of players who could fit in this role, but Mark Scheifele to me is a really solid center iceman, really solid offensively, really solid on both ends of the ice. You get Mitch Marner, who's becoming a pretty solid penalty killer for the Maple Leafs as well, and he's an incredibly gifted offensive player with a great speed, and obviously adding that extra dimension to his game in recent years on the PK just makes him that much more versatile and durable for Team Canada to play a little bit lower role than he'd normally be used to, but certainly he'd be a guy who, when called upon, could jump up in the top six, no problem, at the same time play that complementary role and be on the shutdown line, killing penalties, etc. Of course, you get Stamkos, who's got all kinds of experience, played in Team Canada numerous times before, a former 60-goal scorer. He's kind of evolved into a little bit more of a full 200-foot player over the years. Stamkos is a tremendous hockey player, and you can't leave him off this lineup. It's just too difficult. There's certainly a lot of other players who have been in the spotlight here that could have taken that spot, but we'll see now. Stamkos in the past has been unfortunately missed Olympic time due to injuries, but he's been healthier recently, so we'll see if he can remain healthy and crack this roster. But for me, I'm putting Stamkos on it all the time. Now, next up, your fourth line, which would be like your shutdown line, would be the incredibly strong defensive line led by former Conn Smythe Trophy winner and Stanley Cup champion Ryan O'Reilly, who had one heck of a year last year in St. Louis. Can you imagine O'Reilly having wingers like Mark Stone and Sean Couturier? You're not going to get anything past these guys. They could easily play against other teams' top lines and shut them down no matter how strong they are. They're both guys on the wings here that kind of fly under the radar a little bit, in my opinion. They're not going to get the fanfare that some of these other guys will, but Mark Stone is one of the best sticks in the league, great at takeaways, at the same time being strong offensively as well. Same with Couturier. Stone and Couturier could both give you, anywhere from 70, 80, 90 points a season, and at the same time be incredibly strong defensively. Couturier can play center as well. Obviously, both can play in the PK situations. They do that a lot for their NHL club teams, and you put O'Reilly in the middle, and just really, that is one heck of a strong defensive line, in my opinion. I would wish any other team luck getting through them in crunch time or on a power play or whatnot. It would be really strong fourth line for Team Canada. You could even possibly switch lines 3 and 4 if you want your third line to be more of your shutdown line or more of your PK line as well. Either way, some interchangeable parts there, but that's one heck of a forward group here in my opinion. Now, of course, that leaves some pretty solid names not on this roster. We have guys like Taylor Hall, former Hart Trophy winner, of course, in New Jersey, but, obviously his health is going to concern me a little bit, and his, somewhat inconsistent play. Now, if he comes back next year, or even in the playoffs this year and has some really solid play, I might have to reconsider that selection. I mean, obviously, you got John Tavares for the Maple Leafs. That was tough to leave off as well. He's played for Canada in the Olympics before, especially where he's got some pretty good chemistry with Marner. I debated that. I just like Mark Scheifele's well-rounded game just a little bit better. Tavares, as much as he's not really a slow player, but he's not as quick as some of these other guys. That's another reason why I went with the lineup I did. Of course, you got Braden Point at Tampa Bay, one of the fastest players in the league. He's certainly a player you have to factor in here. He can be versatile, play center, he can play the wing. He also can play in all situations. Can you imagine putting him maybe even on the line where I put Huberdeau with McDavid and McKinnon? That would be such a fast line. That would be incredibly ridiculous to watch. Even another veteran like Jonathan Toews was really tough to leave off this roster, but clearly, he's getting up there in years a little bit. Not quite the same player he used to be, but still could contribute in a smaller role for sure than he did in past years. I mean, Jonathan Toews has some incredibly invaluable experience for internationally for Team Canada that you just, you can't really replicate. Like, he's won gold at so many levels. He's got a gold medal to the Olympics. He's got the World Juniors. He's been in World Championships. He's a Stanley Cup champion. It's an incredibly strong resume. It's hard to leave him them off, but with all these other younger players coming up and playing at a higher level, it's just so tough to still keep them in the mix. Even a guy like Matthew Barzal is one of those younger players coming up to bump a guy like Taves off the team, but still, I didn't quite find room for Barzal on this team either. But you could make an argument for any of these guys that they probably do deserve a chance and a spot, and it's obviously, like I said, a lot of it's going to boil down as well to health and who's hurt and who can play or anything else of that matter when it comes time for the actual tournament. So now let's unveil who I'm taking as the extras. We're going to have one extra D and one extra forward to be that number 7 and number 13 guy on the roster respectively, which will get an opportunity. And I'm taking Cale Makar on defense of the Avalanche. I did select him even though obviously a lot less experience than a guy like a Drew Doughty, for example. Been around the league less time than Shea Theodore, but Makar is just so dynamic. It's incredible. And he has performed for Team Canada at the juniors before. I know it's not quite the same level, but he's just so dynamic. I think he could start off this tournament as a number 6-7D, but by the end of the tournament be playing much bigger minutes. The same thing I said about him when he played for Canada at the World Juniors before his first time in that tournament. I said, he's going to start the tournament slow because he wasn't given a big role, but you watch by the end of it how much of a role he's going to take from these other guys because he's just so good. And then for a forward, we're taking Braden Point, mainly due to his versatility and his speed. I think I could confidently put Point at center. I could put him on the wing, and he's so fast that you could use him on a variety of lines here. So really, I think he's one of the more versatile guys compared to the other guys that I had to make cuts on. So he is my extra forward, and you could certainly, like I said, interchange him. I debated putting him with McKinnon and McDavid. I mean, that just would be a ridiculously fast line. So as I mentioned before, this was an incredibly difficult task, but really fun to do. Like I said, I could probably put together a roster of a second Canadian team that could compete with many of these teams at the Olympics as well. You could probably say the same for some other countries. They've developed so many good, strong hockey players here over the years. I'm looking forward to NHL hockey players being back in this tournament. Obviously, it's still a ways away, 2022. It's about a year and a half from now, but still, it's fun to think about. And I'd like to know what your thoughts are on this roster composition, and let me know who you would put on Team Canada, and stay tuned for other rosters. We're going to be doing other major countries as well. I have lots of NHL players like Team USA, Team Russia, Sweden, Finland, etc. Not sure how many of them we'll do. Obviously, where we mostly cover NHL hockey, I'm going to stick to the countries that have, or will have a high percentage of NHL players on their roster. So let me know which countries you'd like to see next down in the comments, as well as your thoughts on today's Team Canada roster, and we can discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.